Well, good evening, folks. Welcome back. We're glad you're here. If you've not yet seen tonight's episode, which is number 5 in season 1, I think you're going to be very much struck by it. It picks up the story that we've seen so far of Jesus summoning individuals, tapping them on the shoulder to come and see and then to follow him. So far, we've been introduced to Mary of Magdala, who had numerous demons in her life. Nicodemus, the rabbi and teacher of Israel, who is clearly searching for truth that goes beyond the mere rituals of his faith. John the Baptizer, who is Jesus' cousin, or as Simon calls him, Creepy John. Matthew, the tax collector. He's not yet a follower of Jesus. He doesn't appear in this episode. As well as 2 disciples whom Jesus has already called off camera, we might say. That is Thaddeus and James, who will become known as Big James in order to sort of differentiate him from the other James. James, who is John's brother, sons of Zebedee, or as Jesus nicknames them, which I've always loved, Sons of Thunder, which sounds like a motorcycle gang, doesn't it really, more than disciples? We also met Simon and his brother Andrew, all of whom appeared, Simon and Andrew and James and John, to be partners in a fishing cooperative, a koinonia, is what it would have been called, that was operating on the Sea of Galilee based around Capernaum. So tonight the action is going to shift a bit away from the lake shore to focus on 2 principal settings. One is the jail in which John the Baptizer has been imprisoned by the Romans. This is some of the sanctified, creative thinking of the writers. We certainly don't know that he's in this situation with the Romans at this point, but we do know he's in trouble most of the time. And the second location is the town of Cana in Galilee. Now, in the first instance, we see Nicodemus has come to John's cell because he's still greatly bothered by the exorcism of Mary Magdalene. It's going to be a great line worth listening for. As the teacher of Israel will tell the baptizer, he is looking in places he would never go because he's searching for an explanation for something he cannot unsee. Anybody ever felt like that? Something that you cannot unsee, that you wish you could, but something has come that's just sort of rattled the foundations of your thinking. And you think something is off here, something is not as I thought it should be. He's a good picture for us of how when Jesus appeared, things happened others couldn't really explain. He's a good picture of how some folks over the centuries have been unable to make Jesus fit into their understanding of what is real. And so for many, Thomas Jefferson, for instance, they simply cut the miracle stories out of the gospel. And then by that, I mean Jefferson literally did that. He took a Bible, he took scissors and a knife, and he took out of it all the miracle stories. Because Jefferson was a deist who believed in a supreme governor, a supreme creator, but not necessarily in a personal God, and certainly not in someone who would so cavalierly interfere with the laws of nature. What is the reason for that? It is that miracles are not possible for some people. They have what we would term to be a bias against the supernatural. Does anybody know someone like that? That just, it's fine for you to believe, but I just think that didn't happen, okay? When I was a young man, there was another guy that I knew that was having trouble believing in Jesus, and I talked with him numerous times, and finally he said his father had died. He said, I'm not going to believe in Jesus until he comes and sits on the end of my bed and talks to me. I had to say, you know what? I don't know that that's going to happen. But it could. I just don't know that it's going to. And the point is that sometimes we put God into a box that says God cannot do something, or unless he does something that I want him to do, I will not believe in him. They're not bad people. We're going to see in an upcoming episode how Nicodemus has to eventually confront his own understandings when he has a personal encounter with Jesus. And likewise, this is the case in part, at least, for another of the characters of tonight's episode, which is Thomas. Now, what do you know about Thomas? Y'all are just so mean, okay? That's all anybody ever says about Thomas. Well, he's a doubter. And really, Thomas is a thinker, a deep thinker. He has to get it in his head. He has to explain some things. A lot of us are like that. I think the church staff, after almost 7 years, has now figured out, just don't surprise me with something, okay? And if you have a great idea, give it to me and give me time to let it kind of marinate for a while, and then I can have a judgment on it, okay? I have to process things in certain ways. We've already seen Matthew is this way, right? Because he is, if not Asperger's, at least some form of autism in this portrayal of him. He's very good with numbers, but he has to think it all through. Had a young man in another place that was very much like this. When we were living at Lawnmowers College in Jacksonville, he was there for a summer working for us, and there was a dorm which he was staying in, and it was and in the dorm, in front of the dorm, there were arrows to indicate how cars should come through the porte-cochere. That's how cars should come through the porte-cochere. He couldn't not do that. He had to walk all the way around and then back through the same way that a car should do, because the arrows told him that's the way he's supposed to go. Now, all of that is simply to say, all of us are wonderfully and fearfully made, aren't we? Some of us more fearful than actually wonderful, but all of us have our own quirks of personality. And one of the things that's so amazing to me is how Jesus doesn't push everybody into the same box. Whatever someone is like, that is how he works with them. So to a fisherman like Simon, what does he do? He creates an enormous catch of fish. He speaks his language. In the sanctified creativity of the writers of this series, they have given Thomas an occupation, okay, other than professional doubter, okay? And what they're going to suggest is that Thomas is a seller of wine, okay? And really, we would call him an event manager because he goes to weddings and he provides the wine and he provides the services for it. He does all of that with a partner who is the daughter of a vintner or a wine grower. Miracles would seem to be impossible, but the truth is that the supernatural is not beyond a God who is by definition natural, excuse me. That is someone who is above nature. Why is God above nature? Because he's the one who created it, okay? So the creator must, by definition, be above the creation, right? If we can get this notion into our heads, that there is indeed a God who made the heavens and the earth, that he must be able to remake them whenever he wishes. Just as a potter can take the clay and throw it back on the wheel and reshape it to his own design as he wishes. You remember this imagery from Scripture? Thou art the potter, I am the clay. When we get this in our head, okay, if we believe there is a God who made everything, then it's not above the power of that God to change things or to interfere or to slip into the stream of nature whenever it suits his fancy or it fulfills his purposes. If we can get that in our minds intellectually, then our barriers to miracles come crumbling down as well. Tonight, though, Nicodemus and to some extent Thomas are still trying to work it all through. Which brings us to the main story of tonight's episode, which is the incident of Jesus turning water into wine at a wedding in Cana. Now let's get a little better handle on just where we are once more. Cana is only mentioned in the Gospel of John. That makes pinpointing it just a little more difficult. We should notice that Jesus does his first two miracles, semeia in Greek, signs, in Cana. First two there. The first is wedding in John 2, and the second, the healing of a sick child who is there, though Jesus is not. Jesus is in Capernaum. He heals him long distance, John chapter 4. And John 1 and John 21 tells us Cana was the hometown of at least one of the disciples, Nathanael. What do you remember about Nathanael? A fig tree, right? He saw Jesus while he was under a fig tree. And there'll be a nice little homage to that in this when we meet Nathanael and he's sitting up in a fig tree throwing figs at people. Okay. It's likely, though, Cana is a regular stopping point for Jesus during his travels across Lower Galilee. What is known today as the Bet Netofa Valley. John's Gospel and the writings of Josephus, who's the Jewish historian who turns and works for the Romans, they're both careful to identify this particular town as Cana of Galilee. That is to distinguish it from another place called Cana further down in the Jordan Valley. Now, this is not a small, obscure town. It's likely far more affluent and even cosmopolitan than is Nazareth. When you think about Nazareth, what you need to think about is a survivalist cult up on the top of a ridge somewhere, because that's what it is. It's a very small community, maybe 100, 150 people at most, who are at a place that you never pass through on the way to anywhere else. You have to be going there if you want to get there. And they're there specifically because they want to get away from everybody else. They don't believe, the founders of that community, that everybody else is keeping Torah, is keeping the law as they should be. They go off to found their own community where they can keep Torah. Think of an Amish community, perhaps, and you have something similar to it. Nazareth is a pretty small place. Cana, on the other hand, is not that small. Now, the mother of the groom in this story, the parents are not named at all in the gospel, so they've just given them names, okay? And they call her Dinah. She will say to her friend Mary, the mother of Jesus, something about coming all the way from Nazareth to Cana in order to help with the wedding. Well, all the way is 8.5 miles, okay? But it's up and down, so it's not an easy trek. Cana is essentially 8.5 miles north of Nazareth, about 4 miles maybe from Sepphoris, which unless you've been to Israel, you've never heard of, because it's not in the Bible. It's also called Zippori in Hebrew. Sepphoris is an amazing Roman city built in that part of Galilee for one purpose only, to impress the Galileans about how great the Romans are. And you should come over to our side of thinking about things. If you go to it now, it's a great place to visit. I mean, they have ruins. You can see where the main street was. There was theaters. There was a public bathhouse. There was a gymnasium. There was a temple. There was everything there in Sepphoris. 4.5 miles from maybe Cana, which means about 4 miles from Nazareth. Do you think it possible that Joseph, the carpenter, and his son Jesus And the word carpenter really is a word that means craftsman, so it could just as easily be stonemason. And there's a lovely little vintage about stonemasonry here. Do you think it possible that Joseph and maybe Jesus worked on Sepphoris as they were building it? I think it's very likely that they did. Did they ever go there? No, because it was a Roman city, and it was a Gentile pagan city, other than perhaps working on it. There's an aside where Thaddeus is asked by Mary where he met Jesus. Well, again, we have no idea where Thaddeus came from or where he met Jesus in the Gospels. The writers of this series say he will tell Mary he met Jesus at a construction job in Bethsaida, further up the coastline of the sea. They were building things, and Jesus, he says, was building. This is like UM Army, first century, building ramps for the crippled and the elderly to be able to get up into these public buildings. That's a lovely image. Now, if you go to Israel today, most tourist groups will take you to a place called Kefer Kena, which is the traditional site for pilgrims and tourists, at least since the 1500s. That's where the churches that recall the miracle of the wine are all built. But that's probably not where it actually happens. It probably happens at a site known as actually Turbet Kana, which excavations are showing was a very large, thriving Jewish community in the first 100 years, with large public buildings, a synagogue, even some industrial features. Its location also makes it a good stopping point on the roughly 30-mile journey from Nazareth to Capernaum. And you remember that Luke is going to tell us that Jesus moves his headquarters, essentially, his hometown, from Nazareth, again, because it's nowhere, okay, to Capernaum, which is, what did we say about it? On the international highway, right on the Sea of Galilee. All the world passes through it. Why wouldn't you want to be there if you have a message for the world? Okay. So what happens at Cana? Well, unlike our video tonight, John's Gospel doesn't give us any of the details as to who's getting married, who invites Jesus to the wedding, or even why the wine runs out. But John is careful to report the conditions of the miracle, saying that the water within 6 stone jars, each of which would have held between 20 and 30 gallons, is turned into wine. That's a lot of water, by the way, isn't it? 120 gallons of water? Where would you get that? Well, it suggests then Cana was situated near a spring or some other accessible water source. What are the water jars doing there? John 2:6 suggests they are for the Jewish custom of purification, of hand washing and of foot washing and of making yourself ritually clean. They're made of stone and not clay for a simple reason, because stone vessels do not catch impurities if they come in contact with an unclean object or person. Clay can be defiled by impurity, stone can't be. Now, one of my favorite aspects of this whole story is that when Mary asked Jesus to help, and he says what to her? Mother, my time has not yet come. What does she say back to him? Yeah, she doesn't say anything to him, actually. In the video, she says, if not now, when? In the gospel, she doesn't say anything. What does she say? Yeah, she turns to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. Don't you love this? Mom, I'm not ready yet. Do whatever he tells you. Okay? This is just perfect. But we ought to note that even filling these jars with even water would not have been a simple task, would it? Especially since Jesus told the servants to fill them to the brim. So how would they have done that? Think about that for a moment. They would have had to fetch a lot of water to bring it to where the jars are, or take the jars to where the water is, and then haul them back full of water, unlikely. So there's a lot of people doing lots of fetching all of a sudden in a hurry here, okay? Why go to all this trouble? Um, because if there's one thing you do not do at a Jewish wedding, it is to run out of wine. The rabbis even have a saying that there is no rejoicing save with wine. That doesn't mean that the whole point of the celebrations was to get drunk, of course. As has often been pointed out, more often by Baptists and Methodists than, say, Lutherans or Episcopalians, the kind of wine which they drank in those days was generally diluted about 3-to-1 with water. But it's clearly a social faux pas of the highest order not to have enough wine to serve your guests and to serve them well. Because strangely enough, imagine this now, if your guest felt cheated out of a good time at the wedding party, they could sue you in a court of law for not living up to their social expectations. Imagine that today, would you? Nobody would invite anybody to anything, okay? So what does running out of wine mean? It means exposing a bride and groom and their families to some rather serious liabilities, but not just social embarrassment, financial liabilities. That's why it's important that there's enough wine. Because without this young couple is about to enter into their marriage with the equivalent of $200,000 in student debt, and nobody to forgive it. So with that in mind, let's turn then to watch the wedding gift.